Hi everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel. In this video we will discuss regarding NEBOSH IG2 risk assessment report. As we all know, in order to pass NEBOSH certificate or NEBOSH qualifications for IG, we need to pass a risk assessment report as well. For the risk assessment there is a criteria. We have to fulfill 18 points to pass the report, and we have to meet this point as per the standard format provided by NEBOSH. In this video, we will discuss three main sections: a risk assessment report, a risk assessment sample, and an examiner feedback. We all know there are four parts of a risk assessment report: the background part, the risk assessment part, priorities, three actions with justification. The last part is review, communicate, and check. Let's discuss each one by one. A risk assessment, it normally takes 6 to 7 hours to complete. Students must go through NEBOSH IG2 book or syllabus in order to make the report properly. We have to discuss the four parts each one by one. The first part consists of 6 main factors that needs to be considered. The very first point is the name of the organization. We have to mention here. If there is any confidential from the organization, we have to mention a false name. The site location of the organization, the number of workers who are working in the workplace. So this way 3 of the points are cleared. In section 4, we have to discuss regarding the products manufactured by the organization, or if they are providing any service, they have to be detailed here. The type of activities the organization is doing in the workplace and their shift pattern. The shift pattern includes whether they are working day or night, how many hours per shift, how many days they are working each week, and what about the weekend. The fifth point details regarding the area that is included in the risk assessment. This risk assessment is based upon the area from the organization. So if it is specific to few areas, we have to mention their names. If it's a general regarding all the areas in the organization, then we have two details here. Any other relevant information we have to discuss if there is any concern about health and safety. Who is responsible for managing health and safety in the workplace? As well as we can mention if there is any certification achieved by the organization from ISO or any other government authority. The next portion of this section or this part is the part that we have to complete once we have completed the other parts of the risk assessment. This section we have to detail the sources of information that we have consulted while making this risk assessment report. We have to mention the internal sources of information that we have consulted for this risk assessment, as well as the external sources of information that we have utilized or we have consulted in order to make this risk assessment. So the internal sources that we have used, we have to mention the details from the risk assessment, the method statements, the previous records, incident records, absenteeism records, or various types of records. For external sources, we have to mention details from the ILO, from OSHA, from HSE, from websites, various AGC websites we can utilize. Here we have to mention to whom we spoke while carrying out the risk assessment. Do we have any meetings with the management, any interview with the workers, supervisors, workplace, meetings, consultations, we have to mention here. Next, how we have identified the hazards. from direct observation, from task analysis, or whatever documents that we have utilized for this, for understanding the hazards. And we have to give the overall view about the organization, what is already being done. So how was the situation of the organization, and what about the health and safety culture, and what are the controls that you have suggested. So we can discuss an overview of it here. So this way the 6 points will met, and we have completed the first part of a risk assessment. Now we will move to the risk assessment part, where we have to complete a table. We will discuss it. Here we have to mention the name of the organization, similar here. It should be the same name, the date of the assessment of the workplace, and the scope of risk assessment. Here it should be similar to this portion. Description of the area to be included in the risk assessment. Onward, we have 3 points to meet here. Point 7, 8 and 9. Point 7 says there should be minimum 10 hazards described in the hazard section, or we can say the column. But we have limitations. These 10 hazards should be from 5 hazard categories. We can make more than 10 hazards. We can mention more than 10 hazards, but it should be minimum from 5 hazards categories. So let's see what are the hazard categories as mentioned in NEBOSH IG2 book or syllabus. We have 20 hazard categories: radiation, manual handling, load handling equipments, movement of people in vehicles, noise, work equipment, mental ill health, vibration, and many more. So these are the hazard categories. Suppose we are considering electricity. In electricity there are 4 or 5 hazards, but we can take only 2. We cannot take more than 2 hazards from one hazard category. Or from manual handling we can take 2 hazards, not more than that. So if we will fulfill the minimum criteria of NEBOSH, we have to mention 10 hazards, and these 10 hazards will be from at least 5 hazard categories. So each hazard category we can mention only 2 hazards. Next, we have to provide the control measures here. We will discuss each column in detail. Here we have to mention the hazard category. The hazard category, as we discuss, these are the hazard categories. We will link the hazard to these categories, and then we will move to a hazard. We will give a little detail for the hazard. We will discuss it in the sample. Next column belongs to who might be harmed. We have to mention the detail for the person who or a group of people who might be harmed. Workers, the visitors, the public, the operators, or whatever, we have to mention here. And we have to detail how they could be harmed. What are the impact of these hazards over this group of people? We have to mention details here. In the next section, what are you already doing? What controls are already available at the workplace, and what you have suggested and taken on the spot? We have to mention it here in this section. For the same hazard, if there is any controls required, further controls required, we have to mention the controls here. As we all know, the general hierarchy of controls, we will go from the most effective towards the least effective, from elimination, substitution, towards PPE. Then we will mention the time scales. For each control or action that we have suggested, we will provide the time scale. How much is the time required in order to fulfill this action or to take this action? And then we will mention the responsible person who has to take this action. So this way we will make our risk assessment part 2. Let's discuss part 3. In part 3, we will prioritize 3 actions with justification for the selection. We will take 3 actions from these further controls or actions required, and we will justify it through legal, financial, moral reasons, likelihood, severity. Here we have to take 3 actions. We have to justify for action 1, for action 2, for action 3. Once we have selected these 3 actions, our point number 10 is met. Now for point 11, we have to go to IG1 element 1, and we have to generally discuss the moral reason for managing health and safety, the legal reason for managing health and safety, and we have to discuss the financial arguments for managing health and safety. Why this organization has to manage health and safety. We have to detail moral, general legal, and financial arguments. Next, we have to provide specific legal arguments for the action that we are suggesting. It will be specific to legislation, whether national or international. In the next section, we will discuss the likelihood and severity, but this should be based upon the current situation. What is the chances or the likelihood or probability of a hazard to cause harm? We will discuss here unlikely, likely, or certain. So we will discuss the chances of occurrence of this hazard to cause harm, and then we will discuss the severity of this hazard. What is the outcome if this hazard has exposed? So this likelihood consideration and severity consideration should be prior to taking the additional control measures. Means it's the current situation. What is the impact of this hazard? What is the chances of occurrence or the probability of this hazard and the severity that it can cause? We will discuss it. It's very simple. We will discuss it in the sample. In this section, we will discuss the effectiveness of this action suggested for the organization. We will discuss if the organization will take this action, what will be the impact of the action? Will it be able to reduce the risk or control the risk? And for this section, we will have a proper time scale. For each control, we have a proper time scale. So we have to justify it that this time is enough to take this action. And we will also discuss whether this action will fully control the risk or no. So once we have completed this section, our point 13 is met. So the same we will do for justification 2, for justification 3. It's all same. We have to select the action, the legal arguments, the severity and likelihood, and its impact. In part 4, we will discuss the review, communicate, and check. Part 4, the review section consists of 2 points that needs to be met. We have to discuss the realistic review date, when the risk assessment will be reviewed, and the reason for the review date. Normally, a risk assessment is reviewed annually. So we have to mention the date. What is the date of review? And we have to mention reasons why a risk assessment can be reviewed. In this section, we will discuss how the risk assessment findings will be communicated and who you need to tell. So for point 16, we have to discuss what are the methods that would be used to communicate this risk assessment findings to organization levels. It will be meetings, it will be toolbox talks, it will be emails. So we have to consider written, verbal, graphical communications. And to whom we will communicate these findings. We will mention it, the various managerial levels, the workers, the supervisors, how we will communicate it. The last portion belongs to follow up for the risk assessment to check that the actions has been taken by the concerned person. So we have to follow up for the actions that we have suggested in the risk assessment. Once we will fulfill all these 18 points, the examiner will provide a feedback and it will show that all points are met. I will show you the examiner feedback format. Here we can see this is the NEBOSH International General Certificate in Occupational Health and Safety Unit IG2 Risk Assessment Examiner Feedback. These are the 18 points that needs to be met. If all these points are met, then the students are awarded with a pass certificate. So your IG2 risk assessment will be considered as pass. But if there is only one point which is not met, it will be considered as fail. They will consider it as a refer. There is no fail for NEBOSH IG2, but it will be considered as a refer. Now we will discuss the example provided by NEBOSH for a risk assessment in order to guide the students. This is a risk assessment format by NEBOSH. Students are advised not to copy the same things from this format. It is just for guidance. As we discussed, we have the first section, the background, the name of the organization, the location, the number of workers. Here we have discussed the general description of the organization, what is the products they are manufacturing, what are the services they are providing, the work activities and the shift patterns. As we can see, we have details regarding IGG is a medium-sized garage with offices, vehicles repair shop, and we have further details regarding the activities in this sections. This part belongs to the shift patterns, the number of hours working per day, each shift, the weekend, like this. So it's very simple to make a report. Here we will discuss regarding the area which is selected for the risk assessment. It will include details regarding various parts of the workplace. The risk assessment will cover the garage, that includes the storage area and spray booth activities. The office area has a separate risk assessment. So this is we have to consider for the risk assessment, the area. Here, as we discussed, it belongs to the HEC responsibilities, who is taking the responsibilities for managing health and safety, as well as if there is any certification from our ISO or any other standard or regulatory body. So we have to mention it here. As we discuss, this portion will be completed once we have completed the risk assessment. What are the sources that we utilized in order to make this report? To whom we have consulted for making the report, and how we have identified the hazards, what are the internal sources that we have consulted, what are the external sources that we have consulted. Next is the risk assessment part 2, the name of the organization, the date of assessment, and the workshop, stores and spray booth, the area that we have to make the risk assessment. Now we will discuss regarding the risk assessment table. Here we have to mention the hazard category, and then we have to mention the hazard, who might be harmed and how. This is the detail how they can be affected with this hazard. The next column, what are you already doing? It belongs to the existing control available at the workplace, or the actions being taken on the spot while making the report or observing the workplace. Here we have the controls or action advised are suggested for the organization to take with the time scale for each control or for each action, and we have a responsible person for the job for the actions that we have advised. So a concerned person will be considered in order to take this action. Similar, we will do for the rest of the hazards. This is a work equipment hazard category, falling vehicles. This is the hazard, who might be harmed and how, existing control, additional control, or we can say further controls. Here we have to consider one thing. We have to consider the general hierarchy of controls, where we have the most effective controls at top and the least effective at the bottom. We have to eliminate the hazard, we have to substitute or reduce it, we have to take engineering controls, we have to take administrative controls, and the last control is PPE. So we have to consider the general hierarchy of controls for each hazard. Then the time scale should be advised as per the resources available in the organization, and the concerned person should be detailed here. This way we will complete all the table. We will have to identify at least 10 hazards as per NEBOSH. In the next section, we have to prioritize 3 action and justify its selection. Here, first we have to detail regarding the moral, the general legal, and the financial argument. These details we can get from IG1, element 1. It's the moral obligation, the legal obligations, and the financial arguments for the management or for the organization in order to manage health and safety. So we will discuss it here. Next, justification for action 1. We will consider the action from the category, from the hazard category. We will describe it. Then specific legal requirements belongs to this action. We have to consider it, or belongs to the hazard. We have to describe it here. Then the current situation of the hazard, how likely it can cause harm, and what is the severity of the hazard. So the likelihood will be described here, and then the severity should be described. If the organization take this control or this action, what will be the impact? So the intended impact of the action, we will describe it. Then the justification of the time scale that you have provided, we have to mention it here, how you can justify the time scale. And then what is your view or your approach if the organization will take this action, how it will affect the risk. It will control the risk, or there will be still a risk. So the same we will do for action 2 and then action 3. In the last part, we will have to review the risk assessment, to communicate the risk assessment findings and follow up or check. So the first portion should be from 50 to 100 words, and then 100 to 150 words, and then 100 to 150 words. Here we have to mention 2 things: the planned review date and the reason for the review. So normally it's organizational procedure for reviewing policy is annual based, and sometimes if there is any changes in the management or in the legislation, or if there is any insurance advice or added, so we also review the risk assessment. But we have to mention the date for the annual review of the risk assessment. This date should be linked with the date of assessment. Here, as we can see, the date of risk assessment, it's here 14 July. So we have to mention the review date is 13 July of next year. Then we have to communicate this risk assessment findings to various management levels in the organization. How we will communicate it? We will use the various means of communication. Like verbally we will communicate it, written form we will communicate, and in the graphical form we will communicate. Also, to whom we will communicate: the management, the supervisors, with the various group or levels in the organization. We have to communicate this risk assessment findings. Then in the last section, we will have to describe how we will follow up for this risk assessment. The actions that we have suggested are advised for the organization. So we have to identify how we can follow up for the actions advised, how we will come to know that the organization or the concerned person have taken the action as advised or no. So we have to discuss it here. This is all about risk assessment IG2. I hope you have understand the risk assessment in this video. If still there is any query or any confusion regarding IG2 risk assessment, we have mentioned in the very beginning our contact number. We have WhatsApp on the same number available. If there is any question, you can access anytime. Thanks for watching the video. I hope it will help you in order to make your risk assessment properly and will guide you, inshallah. For upcoming videos regarding risk assessment and NEBOSH, please do follow and subscribe our channel. Thank you.